Tabletopped will start after the following messages.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm from the Old Ways Podcast, here to introduce you to your next favorite show. What is the Old Ways Podcast? It's a weekly tabletop RPG show in actual play format where a group of amazing role players serve up new experiences in homebrew and published scenarios. Well over 500 episodes of beautiful, fully produced actual play content for you to enjoy. Check us out, the Old Ways Podcast. Thanks.
Are you looking for an actual play podcast with young, hot role players, disciplined professional voice actors, and wholesome content? Well, this isn't that podcast. AARPG is an adults-only podcast with interviews, actual play stories where...
Excuse me, Matt, why do you sound like you've been chain smoking since you were a toddler?
What do you mean?
The voice. You don't have to do that voice, man.
I don't?
Nah, just tell them that we're a group of old friends who like to get together, hang out, play lots of different types of games, and we want them to feel like they're sitting at the table with us. And they can find us just by searching for the AARPG podcast on their favorite podcatcher and at the AARPGs on YouTube.
Welcome back to another episode of Tabletop. This is your host, Nick, and today we are going to talk about how to get into designing your own game. Are you a TTRPG enthusiast who's always been world building and home brewing, but you really want to take that next step and make your own system? Well, this is the episode for you because I am having back a family favorite, a podcast world star, the all-star, Mac.
It's me! I'm an all-star.
Mac,
Hits start coming and they don't stop coming.
Exactly. Thanks, Smash Mouth. So, Mac, why have I brought you on this episode? Why would I turn to you for design expertise?
Well, for the past 9-ish months now, I've been designing my very own role-playing game.
Woohoo!
It's called Mnemosiny, and it's it's just like it's in its very early stages of development. For those of you that listened to the PAX Unplugged episode, previously, I was able to play test it
I can't wait to talk about that.
at PAX, which was very fun. And I've had friends play it. So we're just here talking about what that's been like and what it might be like for you to design your own game.
Yeah, one thing that I'm super impressed by is that you didn't do the easy way. And let me just be clear, designing your own system is always going to be hard. You know, like you have to do a lot of balancing. You have to be very specific about what you want to do with it. It's always going to be hard. But a lot of people start with a system and then they kind of iterate upon that. You were like, I really like certain types of games. I'm going to build a system off of that.
Yes. And for me, I guess, it started actually with the idea of the kind of like power system, like how abilities work in this world.
Yeah.
That was where it started for me. And so it didn't actually come from a mechanical place at all to start. It came from actually a narrative place of like, wouldn't it be cool if kind of thing.
Right. So why don't we start at the very beginning then? Sure. What made you start it wanting to like get into this space of like, I'm going to design a TTRPG, essentially.
Yeah. So, Nick and I are both DMs, and I am a bit of a... thank goodness Nick's around, or else I'd be a forever DM.
Yeah.
But, I DM a lot, and a lot of DMing and GMing is game design.
Yeah.
It just is. If you can... create a narrative, create a story. Every combat encounter, especially in D&D 5e you create, is a minigame. It is.
Yeah, because you're always doing balancing. You're always doing like dynamic. You're sort of basically running through in your brain, at least I do, sort of a simulation of what you kind of expect to happen or how you expect people will engage with what you're making.
Yes.
So in that way, yeah, you are always designing when you are GMing in really any system, but specifically D&D because the mechanics involve so much math.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So anything that so I was like, okay, like that was kind of the door for me that I think creaked open, and I just kind of opened it of like, I've already done this.
Yeah.
I love playing games. I love kind of examining what works and does not work in games.
Yeah.
And for me, you say, oh, you didn't take the easy way. But for me, actually, it's always been easier to homebrew than it has been to follow a module, for example. Like running a module for me is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to keep in my mind what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier for me to make shit up kind of on the spot because I'm an improviser just like you. So it's, it's easier in that way for me. So making a whole new thing was way easier than iterating on a system that I maybe felt like I fully understood but maybe didn't. It was like, great, let me just create a new thing that I just fully understand.
Okay, so when I think about designing, even when it's just a session, when I'm staring at an empty piece of paper, it can be really hard. So I assume that that's even more so when you are, developing a new system and you are doing what you did, which is, okay, I'm going to start completely from scratch. I want to make my own thing so that I can tell the stories I want to tell. So what was your first steps? Like, how did you... How did you get from step 0 to step 1, which I think a lot of people find to be the hardest part?
Great. Yeah. So for me, it was... for the first thing that I would say, and that worked for me, and I just got lucky, was be open to whatever idea comes to you and don't look for it.
Yeah.
Because the second you start looking, it becomes very elusive.
Yeah.
So it's like just open yourself up to the possibility that a thing could exist.
Okay.
So I was in a class in grad school. And it was a playwriting class.
Yep.
Devising plays with kids. And one of my... fellow students, who is now the artist for the game, Tyler, he just kind of like posited the question to kind of like help to write this play that he was writing. If you could write a message to you in the moment of your first memory, what would that message be? And that made me realize in this moment, because I never really thought about that, like, oh my God, like our first memories are so powerful.
Yeah.
They're so meaningful. Yeah. Everybody has one. And even if you think that it's, created by a story being told to you over and over or whatever, it doesn't matter, but everybody has one. And so I'm riding home that night and I'm like, first memory, wouldn't it be cool if there was a world in which everyone had some ability that was derived from whatever their first memory is. And then Mnemosyne was born. In that moment, that was the first step.
Yeah.
Was just like, oh, and then also like, you'll know it, right? It's Marie Kondo vibes of like, this sparks joy.
Yeah.
Like that idea to me sparks joy.
I really like that idea of starting with a what if, like finding something that interests you and then saying, what if, taking that idea, inserting it into the what if, and then honestly, you did a really good job at taking it to its logical conclusion, which was, like you said, you had this idea of what if the first memories really affected you in a much like a meaningful way, not only just emotionally, psychologically, but also the way you interact with the world, in this case, what powers you're able to manifest. And then you took it to a step further, which I really love, where you were like, yeah, but if that was the case, in the world in which we live, there would constantly be people trying to like create or tailor those memories to be useful to them.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes. Which is why I was like, okay, and who would do that?
Yeah.
Corporations.
Right.
Which is how the game ended up being almost cyberpunk.
Yeah.
It's not cyberpunk, but it is like a world heading in that direction.
Yeah.
Because it's like, great. Corporations are buying children when they're babies, and they are basically making sure they have traumatic first memories because those are the most powerful abilities come from trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting way to like set it up. But you're saying all this stuff, and so far it's all narrative. It is world building. It is all that kind of stuff. How do you start taking the kind of lateral step of, okay, this is the world that I'm building. I'm doing what every GM does when they start a homebrew campaign of kind of creating this world. How do you then get to mechanics from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing that helped me the most with that was to have someone to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah.
So what I started doing was me and my friend Ethan, we just talk about our D&D games all the time.
Yeah.
He's really into lore and all that stuff, and I knew he'd be into the idea. So I don't know, we were just in the Discord, we were just playing video games, and like after we'd get done playing video games for the night, like I would just be like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I knew a few things going into the system. One, I wanted it to be elegant. And elegance to me in design means that the mechanics of the system reflect the narrative of the world.
Yeah.
So D&D 5e uses a D20 for most things. Inherently, this is a world in which things are very swingy.
Yeah.
Where crazy cool things happen and horrible, terrible things happen in equal measure.
Yeah, and kind of seemingly for no reason.
Yes, yes, it's very funny.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah.
A D20 is funny.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, if I want a system in which that it mirrors how memory works, dice don't do that for me.
Yeah.
Because I can recall a memory pretty easily whenever I want to. I can kind of choose to do it. And then also I was expanding on the idea of memory, and I was like, okay, mechanically, we as people, our memories actually do inform how good we are at things.
Yeah.
Right? Someone who is the best runner in the world has lots of memories of running.
Yeah.
And being successful at running.
Yeah.
You know? Like, and those memories actually inform the lessons that they learned that got them to this point.
Yeah.
And also their training that they did. They have memories of that training, and their body has memories of that training too, which express themselves in musculature, in cardio strength, right? And
it's like that book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Like literally, though.
Yeah, totally.
It does. and your memories are a part of that. Someone who is Ethan actually came up with this idea as we were just bouncing ideas. I'm like, dice don't feel right. Like, I don't know what to do with that. And he's like, well, what if it's a deck of cards and those cards represent memories that you have?
Yeah.
And I was like, great. And then that naturally, right, you just follow the emergent gameplay there. It's like, okay, great. Then if you have classes, because that's something I love from role-playing games, I wanted to port over classes. Archetypes is what they're called in Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne, by the way, is the titan of Greek memory. You can look her up. She's cool. Some people say it Mnemosyne. Some people say it a million different ways. It doesn't matter how you say it. Who cares?
However you remember.
Exactly. That's right. But so it's a deck of cards, and those cards come in 4 categories, which are beef, which represents strength.
Yep.
And in choosing the word beef, I'm like, great. I want the game to be funny.
Yeah.
I want people to be like, I'm a buff, dumb guy.
Yeah.
It's funny. Beef, right? I didn't choose strength. I chose beef. There's smarts, which is like clear. There's grift, which is charisma. Kind of.
Yeah.
And then there's moves, which is dexterity. And your deck is basically made up of some number of those cards.
Yeah.
And then to do a skill test, you flip over cards from the top of your deck up to 5 cards, and the GM will ask you to reveal a certain number. And if you reveal that number, you did it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, if I'm an expert runner, I might have 8 moves cards in my deck. The GM might ask me to reveal 3 moves cards. I reveal up to 5. I have some abilities that also make it easier for me to receive moves cards because I'm the swift archetype.
Yeah, you have an archetype, for example, that's an intelligence-based character. That's essentially like you can take one card that you flipped over in your deck and replace it with a intelligence card from your discard pile, essentially.
Yeah, there's some abilities like that.
So that you can kind of buff. Because like this person's really good at intelligence. Even when things don't really come up their way, they can sort of change the odds to do their one thing really well.
That was like, okay, we did it.
Yeah.
We got that's the mechanics that represent the narrative of this world where memory is everything, but fuck, we don't have a way to use these abilities, which was the core of the system from the start. And that sucked ass to develop. That was like, okay, I was like, fuck, these abilities could be swingy. Maybe we use dice for those.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, okay, so now people have to have like a custom deck of cards that comes in the box of the game.
Yeah.
Supposedly. and also they need dice?
Yeah.
And do I just assume they have dice, or do we include dice in the box? Like, as a designer, it's like, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
I think, but what you came up with is a pretty elegant solution to this.
Yes.
So can you kind of walk me through, because
Sure.
I've said this a lot. D&D has one mechanic. Roll dice, yes, no, is basically the entirety of that system.
Yeah, it's true.
But the way that you went about it, you actually made several different mechanics out of the same deck of cards.
Yes.
Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So the yes-no thing, let's just start there. I knew pretty much right away I didn't want that.
Yeah.
And, D&D, I feel like, actually is moving in this direction, too. It's taking things from Powered by the Apocalypse systems. And what it's doing now is like, I feel like what's actually changed a lot since the 80s, it used to be, did you pass the check or not?
Yeah.
Now it's like, make an insight check. I have not set a DC.
Yeah.
The higher number you get, the more information you get.
Yeah.
Is kind of where it is.
So it's a gradient. Yeah.
It's gradient. It's a mixed success.
Yeah.
And that's where I wanted the game to live, in mixed success land. So the game operates in, I haven't figured out the exact percentages yet, but mostly mixed success, some failure.
Yeah.
And
Which,
we wanted...
If you think about Powered by Apocalypse for our listeners and everything who might not quite understand what this means, like what they did with a 2-dice system, a 2d6 system, is say, okay, what are the average highest numbers you can roll? And on a set of 2 dice, it is 6 and 7, which with a modifier, which almost all of your stats have in that system, you're always going to be getting like a 7 or 8, which is mixed success there. So they said, okay, we want this game to mostly have the players be rolling a mixed success when they do things.
Yes.
That way it becomes a little bit more dynamic. They're not always getting everything they want, and that's where the game lives. So you decided when you did this, whatever mechanic I do, I have to make it so that that mixed success number is what's coming up most often. Yeah.
Yes. So we have these cards, you flip them over. And then I was like, okay, what if you have a separate deck? And that represents, your ability to use your power. But then I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
And
I already have a deck.
You already have a deck. What if you wrote on the other cards values that were like numerical values? Because the cards themselves, they just basically are like a graphic. It says moves on it. Great, that's 1 moves.
Yeah.
You did it. But now in the corners, there are these numerical values called, when you use your ability, here's a little lore for you. The ability is called an echo.
Yeah.
Because it's an echo of your first memory. And in the lore of the game, you are an echo tuner.
Yeah.
You have the ability to tune your echo by feeding it minor memories that you have of other things.
Yeah.
So how it works is these cards have values on them, and you're playing blackjack, basically, where if you're using your ability in a controlled way, which is like the middle level of strength, you have to reveal 2 cards at a time from the top of your deck, and you're looking to hit a certain number. And you can also hit a range underneath that number or hit that number. If you choose to stop before you hit that range, you don't do it.
Yeah.
And you just don't do it.
Yeah.
No
consequences.
No
you
consequences.
Just don't do it.
You just don't do it, but you burn through some cards. And your cards are a limited resource.
Yeah.
If you bust, you take a consequence, and
they can be pretty big consequences.
Yes. And your echo does something unexpected.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good. Maybe it's bad. It's for the GM to decide.
Yeah.
If you hit the number exactly, full success, you control the narrative because it's a narrative-based game. This is another thing. I wanted to live in a narrative world because living in a mechanical world is scary and I hate it. And it's way harder to balance.
Yeah, and also like living in a mechanical world, really, I mean, there are certain TTRPGs that are able to do it, like Pathfinder and other stuff. But like, in my mind, if you're living in a mechanical world, you're playing a board game.
Yeah.
Or a skirmish game, which is very fun, but it is also sometimes not what you're wanting to develop.
No. So I wanted to live in a narrative world. I knew that. So they control the narrative, and then if you get in the range, you take consequences equal to the number that you got below the number to hit. So it uses the same deck for both things. And then we were like, okay, well, how do we determine what numbers go on what cards?
Yeah.
And what we figured out is, well, if you have more of a certain kind of memory,
Yeah.
those memories then are diluted. They're less valuable.
Yeah.
Right? So going back to our expert sprinter, if they have a million memories of them running well, those memories are like, I could feed one into my Echo. Who cares?
Because they're also, at that point, they're kind of just like reality. Like, I can run fast. I know this.
Yeah. I'm going to feed that. I'm going to feed a little memory of the run that I did 3 days ago into my Echo.
Yeah.
So those had a value of 1. They're low value, less swingy. But that person, they might be a socially awkward person.
Yeah.
And so they might only have 2 grift cards in their whole deck of 20 cards, 21 cards. And those cards, their grift cards, then are very valuable to them.
Yeah.
They might only have a few memories, valuable memories of them being like truly charismatic.
Yeah.
Like impressively so.
Yeah.
And so those have a value of 4. So when you're playing this mini game where you're flipping over cards, let's say you flip over like a grift card and a moves card, that's 5.
Yeah.
I told you your number to hit is 7. You have to flip over with a range of 3.
Yeah.
So you can hit 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
You're going to get it. Do you want to try and flip over 2 more cards? Most of your cards are 1s.
Yeah.
But you could do it.
Yeah.
That's where the game lives. And that kind of decision-making is also something I wanted, where it's like, oh, you actually have to choose.
Because at that point, you're like, I know for sure I have a partial success. And also, like, push your luck games are very fun. So.
They're fun. Yeah, so there's this mini game of push your luck in there as well,
also,
which
like,
I wanted as well, so that's in there.
So at not this year's PAX, but the PAX before, there was a whole mechanic guy who was like doing a keynote talk about it. And he was very much like, there are a couple of ways to design mechanics. Either they're weak and fun, weak and unfun, strong and fun, strong and unfun. And where you want to live is weak and fun, because you don't want every time someone pulls a lever for the game to break. And you don't want people like to go to their strong moves and be like, this is so unfun to do. So you want some that are like strong and fun, but like can't do it very often. And then you want strong or weak and fun all the time, because then people are like, yes, this is so fun and I do it all the time. And it's not going to break the game. So in this way, you've sort of made a push your luck system where like the deck is a resource that is diminished, but you get your deck back at the end of the game. Like you kind of come to the next round where you can kind of consolidate it back in. Kind of. The way that, just a quick tangent, the game has physical strain, which is like physical health, mental strain, which is, this is all pulled from Arkham Horror, the card game. I like that idea that it's like, oh, you have like mental capacity and physical capacity. They're different things. Right. And then also your deck usually is like 21-ish cards, and if you don't have cards to flip over, you can't do anything. Yeah. You're not knocked out, but you can't do anything. Yeah. So, like, what? Like, you have to run. Yeah. Get out of there. So, yeah, that's another thing. And when you run through your deck, you have to forget a card from it until you basically take, in D&D, what would be the equivalent of a long rest. Yeah. So, when we talk about the development cycle of this game, you got to a point where you're like, okay, I have these mechanics. I have a how to do skill checks and combat checks. And you kind of have all of that already set within just these 2 things with the deck. How did you then go about making the classes and making them feel different? Because a lot of people, when they design a game, they really want to hit at like a very specific feeling for their players. Yep. And that can be really hard. And so you had your mechanic of like how people do stuff. How did you design the actual players that, like the characters that they're going to be able to play? Sure. So the first thing I started with was, well, we have 4 cards. We have moves, beef, smarts, and grift. So there's going to be an archetype for each of those things. Yeah. And again, it's like, okay, in D&D, right? It's like you can cast spells. Great. There's a class all about that. Wizard. Yeah. Okay, great. You can attack people with weapons. There's a class all about that. Fighters. Yeah. Right. And so I was like, great. So those classes, they are the muscle, the clever, the swift, and the influential. Yeah. They mirror each other, and they're also under an umbrella in the book called easy archetypes. Yeah. If you've never played a role-playing game before, these are great ones to start with.
all of their
they're
abilities
in the DMG or whatever.
Yes, all of their abilities mirror each other.
Yeah.
They all have an ability where they can trade out any 2 cards for one of the cards that they like.
Mm-hmm.
They all have an ability where they can trade out 3 of the cards that they like for one of any other card.
Yeah.
They all have that.
Yeah.
But they feel different because it's each of a different stat.
Mm-hmm.
Then they all have basically like an ultimate thing that they can do once per short rest or something. And they all have a lot of the card that they like.
Yeah.
They play very differently because they're good at different things, but mechanically, they're the same.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But people that are new to role-playing games, they won't really care about that.
Yeah.
Nor will they really notice it.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to paying attention to mechanics like that. And so those archetypes are for them or for someone who wants to basically like be really good at one thing.
Yeah.
Then from there, I was like, okay, well, we have this other card we haven't talked about yet called luck cards.
Yeah.
And luck cards, everybody has one. And they, it just represents sheer luck. Because luck is a thing in role-playing games, and I like that. So everyone has a luck card, and I was like, great. If we have a luck card, there has to be a class that interacts with the luck card.
Yeah.
So we have the lucky, and they have 2 luck cards, and that's what they do. They have 2 luck cards, and they can automatically succeed when they get them.
Yeah.
That's their whole deal.
Yeah.
They're lucky.
You've gone from a 1 in 20 to a 1 in 10 chance of drawing one of these cards.
Exactly.
So it's like a pretty major improvement to a deck.
Yes, they're very like that's their whole deal.
Yeah.
Is they're not particularly good at anything, but sometimes they'll just pass.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, well, we have a lucky. We have to have the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So now there's a guy with no luck cards who you played in a playtest.
Which I will say was very fun. So basically, and I want you to walk me through how you designed this, because what Mac did essentially was make somebody who, like, it seemed that fate had it out for them, and they have these curse cards in their deck.
Yep.
And so every time you pull, you'll sometimes get these curse cards, which can really fuck up everything you're trying to do, because you get them and they don't go towards whatever
They don't
check.
add anything.
Yeah, so they're just these useless cards bogging down your deck. However, when they're in the discard pile, then they start to be able to do stuff where you can kind of interact with them and use them as a resource that allows you not really to do stuff to help you all the time, but eventually they can get to a thing where it's like very powerful. You're cursed, but like, you know, cursed is like a werewolf. You're powerful when your curse is in full bloom. So it is like essentially you've made a feeling where I fucked up so much during that game, but then had a few moments where I was like an unstoppable monster, and it felt amazing. Where I was like, wow, this is a really cool guy. Where he's, you know, his whole life, he like things haven't gone his way. He doesn't think of himself very much, but there are these moments where he has really proved to be sort of an extraordinary individual, which was really interesting to play. But like, how did you design that? Because I remember talking during your design phase, and I was like, so what is the math of all this? And you're like, I have no fucking idea. So like, how did you go about designing it in a way that would make that feeling happen? Because you were very successful with it. And even since then, you've tweaked it so they would be even more so. So like, how would you do that?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do with that archetype was, the concept was fail forward.
Yeah.
So the lucky succeeds backwards.
Yeah.
When they get their luck card and they automatically succeed, they forget it. And then they have ways to get it back, but only through failure.
Yeah.
The curse in that case, I wanted to fail forward. So basically, I created, I was like, great, I'm familiar with mechanics in games. What would be fun? Maybe ramping.
Yeah.
Right? Ramping up.
Yeah.
Like, okay, the first time that I reveal a curse card and I fail with it in my hand, I don't take as many consequences from that failure.
Yeah.
The second time, and then I forget the curse. The second time I do it, I get a better thing, and then I forget it. And when we were playing with you, those effects stacked.
Yeah.
They no longer stack. That was busted.
Yeah, the stack was amazing.
It was crazy.
Because I started playing in such a way that I was like, I want to get through my deck so I can find these curse cards and forget them into my discard pile. And so I would take on challenges that I was not equipped for and that I would fail at, but I would be able to move through my deck.
Because it was too easy. But so, and then also the other thing with that example, right, is we were like, when we were playtesting, I was like, in the moment, I was like, this feels wrong.
Yeah.
And you were like, yeah, this feels wrong. We're like, great, let's try this. And we tried it and it worked way better.
Yeah.
So we changed it immediately. So basically it was like, okay, how do I basically make the cursed a reflection of the lucky but opposite? And how do I, in that case, make it fun? That one was really hard, actually, to design. And then for the rest of the archetypes, I won't go into all of them in detail for time, but they're all basically a mirror of each other. So there is the corpo. Their whole deal is that they work for a corporation. I knew I was going to play this thing in an almost cyberpunk world. The corpos have a lot of resources. That's their whole deal. So this guy is really good at stuff. Like, he's just good at stuff, but he has no friends. And so there's another mechanic in the game called schemas, which basically add tags in the same way as like a City of Mist or a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And this guy only has one of them because he doesn't have any memorable stuff. I'm like, great, okay, well, I have a guy that only has one of those. So now I have to have a guy that is normal, who is just a basic dude that, and I love the idea in like Monster of the Week of the mundane.
Some of the best classes,
Exactly. It's just, so he's a nobody. You know, so I made that class, and he has normalcy cards that'll just bog down his deck and me. He's just, okay, I'm fine at whatever. And then I made a generalist who just like can be a jack of all trades character. So it's like all of these for me are kind of like, they're archetypes I've seen other places. And then whenever we introduced a new mechanic, so like me and Ethan are both really into Slay the Spire, and he was like, what about trash cards that go into your deck? I was like, great. So, and it was so funny, Nick. It took us forever to think of what we were going to call these trash cards. We were like, oh, what is it called when you like can't think of the thing and it's on the tip of your tongue? And eventually we're like, oh my God, it's called drawing a blank. And so the cards are called blanks, and you draw them. So we have blank cards, and I was like, great, well, now we have these blank cards, so there has to be an archetype that deals with the blank cards. So we created the archetype that deals with the blank cards. So that's kind of how it worked, right? It was all emerging from itself.
So you were really like, and stop me if this isn't correct, but when you came upon your mechanic, you then said, how will my players interact with this mechanic? And then you started splitting it down by each aspect of the mechanic and said, okay, each of these parts of the mechanic can be a specialty of each class.
Exactly.
Essentially,
Yes, and if you look at other games with like classes and things like that, like that's something that I just observed in other games.
I mean, it's kind of, like you have, even within D&D, like the wizard you were saying, they have the spell book, but then you, like, that is a mechanic of spell casting that, if you look at all the other spellcasting archetypes in there, they have a limited spell book. They have limited spell slots. They can only do certain things, or they don't have control over how they use these things. And so you can actually kind of see like, oh, they looked at their magic combat system and then just looked at each individual piece and said, one class can do all of it. One class can do this part really well. This part can do this part really well. And then that's how you get sorcerer, cleric, druid, whatever.
Exactly. That's right. And it also, like, you look at sorcerer. It's like sorcerer has meta magic. They have sorcery points. Why? Because the magic comes from inside of them. Like, that's the whole thing. But they can't switch out their spells at all, you know? It's so because it comes from them. Like, it all emerges from the narrative of the thing. Which is why designing a role-playing game for me was a lot less daunting than creating a board game. Because board games, it's like, you know, like there are some board games where I'm like, mechanically, this rules. Who cares about the narrative? Scout is a great example of this. Cool small box game. But it's like, you know, the narrative of that game is that you're like running a circus. It's like no one gives a shit. Like the game is mechanically really tight. You know?
And like, so we're going to go to a break in a second. But just to leave everyone with this, the thing that I've really pulled out of this first half of our conversation is you basically start world building, start figuring out what feeling you want to evoke out of the game. So you get basically your direction from that. And then you go for okay, how do I want to make a mechanic that interacts with that feeling? In this case, you were like, I don't want something swingy or variance based like dice. I want something a little bit more trackable, but also something exhaustible and like all these different things. You found a deck of cards. you had your mechanic and started like building in there. And then when you're like, okay, now I have to figure out how these classes are going to interact with this mechanic, you just looked at each part of the mechanic you built and pulled out different aspects that each of the classes could be really good at.
Yes.
That is a really great place to start. Right after this break, I really want to get into play testing. And then I also want to talk a little bit about like what the next steps of people who do this are. So we'll be back right after these messages.
Hey, cool people. Do you like mead, magic, and long walks in the icy tundra? Ever wonder what your sled dogs are thinking about? Why not cap off your night with a frosty tabletop adventure?
You will come to love my beef cliff.
You're at the common room. Go to your room.
Excuse us.
Excuse me, Dolcliff. What's your favorite food?
Sausages, probably.
No, you look like a strong lot, but I've got more friends than you.
Carnelian's like shortened on the ground, and he's standing
You
on
know
top of the table.
what you have to
That is
do.
a-
You know what you have to do.
Carnelian stabs him in the butt.
What did he say?
He likes sausages.
Oh my god, me too.
Alright, I'll sit beside Word and start carving his rod.
Oh my god. Sveta, my rod's nearing completion by the looks of things.
Unless the four of you can stop them.
Well, grab your Ugg boots and join Reflex Save every Wednesday on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey everyone, it's your host Nick, back again to tell you about something that I am super passionate about. It's answering your questions, and man, we would love to do so in the new year. If you want to, you can go to our website, tabletopppod.com, and on the front page, you scroll down, there is a contact form. You fill it out with your burning questions for us, the hosts, and we will respond in the podcast. Just let us know if we can use your name, and we will answer your question to the best of our ability. So if you're interested, head to our website at tabletopppod.com, scroll down on that front page, and leave us a message from the contact form. We love doing mailbag episodes, and we can't wait to answer your questions in the new year. Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of Tabletop, where we're talking to Mac about developing your own TTRPG. It's a new year, and you could be playing a new game that you created. So let's talk a little bit more about how, Mac, last where we left off, I guess, you were at a place where you had made some classes, you had made a mechanic, you had an idea of a system. I've seen this like 90-page Word doc you have on like Google Docs or whatever.
100 now? Yeah.
But you got that sort of like you were doing it on your own. You were just creating. But then it was time where you're like, I'm so far into this, I can't really see my way out. I need to play test to make sure what I have right here is actually workable. I'm very close to this thing. And you brought in me and some other folks to start play testing. Can you talk about how you can play test in a successful way? When I think about this, I think about playwriting or writing of any kind. When you're eliciting notes from people, they can be very unhelpful. And they can be like exactly a waste of time. Like you have to do it in kind of a specific way. So can you talk about how you went about play testing and what you wanted out of it?
Sure, yeah, and I want to do a lot more of this too. So for the first play test, it was really like, I told everyone before we started, I was like, this is the world we're in. I ran everyone individually through character creation. And as they went through character creation, I was like, before we begin, get out something to write with and write down any moment that you are confused.
Yeah.
Like literally just write, Max said this, confused.
Yeah.
Like just note it. Like what I said and what was confusing, or like what you're looking at and what's confusing. Because that's what I wanted to know. Because I was like, great, for character creation, readability and ease of use.
Yeah.
Most important thing for me. So I did that. Then at the playtest itself, I had kind of made the decks of cards that we used. I had just like made little prototypes that I gave to everybody. And at the very top, I think just being as clear as possible about where you are, what your intentions are, and how open you are to different kinds of feedback is so important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll get feedback back that isn't helpful. And after this, I'm going to talk about a moment of playtesting that wasn't helpful to me and how I got myself in that situation.
Yeah.
So we can learn from that as well. So here was the successful playtest. We sat down and I was like, great. I want you to write down a moment, any moments where you feel like, that was cool.
Yeah.
You did it, you do something, or you see somebody do something, and you're like, that was cool, or that was satisfying, or that felt awesome. I also want you to write down any moments where you feel like, that didn't feel good.
Yeah.
That did not feel good. I want you to write down any moments where you're confused.
Yep.
I want you to write down any moments, any mechanical issues that you see, any dead ends.
Yeah.
Here is what I don't want. This is important too, I think, to say, is like, I don't really want any feedback on, I can't really remember what I said in that first playtest, but, like, for example, like, I don't want any feedback on how the cards work.
Yeah.
The cards will be working this way, and if you have feedback about that, I appreciate it. I'm not ready for feedback on that piece of it right now.
Right.
I don't want feedback on the world in which this is set.
Yeah.
I think the entire system is based around it being an almost cyberpunk world. At this point, changing that aspect of it would change too much of the design. It would make it a different game.
Yeah.
So like mentioning those things, because then your playtesters will be like, thank God. Now I only have like 4 things to think about.
Yeah. They can be really focused.
They can be focused and they can think about the game.
It's like, as someone who has play tested, I really appreciated that kind of direction, because it can be very daunting sitting down with someone who's developing something and being like, I am just tracking everything and being like, okay, this happened and I'm thinking about this. Oh, but this is happening over here. I have to give my opinions on all of this. And so having a little bit of structure where you can say, okay, really what I should be focusing on is, like you said, what feels good, what feels bad, when am I confused? That's so much easier to keep track of as well.
Yes. And also it's like, in a collaborative game, I think it's a little easier. Collaborative storytelling, it's a little easier to get on with that as well, because it also depends, honestly, like on the GM and on the players. And it's like, I'm very lucky to like know players that are very good. And it's like a lot of role-playing game experience is from, like negative experience I've heard is from negative player experience.
Yeah, right.
So then one situation I got myself in later that wasn't helpful was I told my friend, I was like, I really need someone that's going to try and break it.
Yeah. That's
going to try and like nitpick it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't clear enough about that. And so like we're going through the book, and what I really wanted, this is what I wanted. I wanted to give him the full rundown, and then I wanted him to nitpick everything after.
Yeah.
But what happened was, as I was going through, he stopped me every 5 seconds and was like, well, how is that going to work in relation to this?
Yeah.
And he was like playing the devil's advocate. He was doing what I'd asked him to do, but just not in the way that I really wanted him to do it. And I learned in a valuable moment that I was like, oh, like, you have to be really specific. And don't worry about being finicky with it. Don't worry about being kind of like type A asshole about it. Like, don't worry about, like, people are gonna be like, oh, Mac doesn't want this kind of feedback. What? Like, is he like worried that I'm gonna be mean? It's like, no, it's like, I don't want that kind of feedback because I know it's not gonna be helpful right now.
Yeah.
And be comfortable asking for that. I know some people can be a little uncomfortable being very specific and very nitpicky with their friends.
Yeah.
But it's like, and they've agreed to playtest with you. And that is like such a huge thing. And it's like, be so grateful and buy them dinner like for it, But other than that, it's like, if they're good friends like Nick and our friends Summer and Ethan were in that playtest, it's like they'll just be along for the ride and they'll be ready to give you the honest feedback that you really want.
Yeah. And honestly, when it comes to like the breaking of it that you were saying, you can, in my opinion, and this is very dependent on the game you're trying to make, but I would never develop a game for someone who would try to break the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I would never develop something being like, okay, now I have to make sure that this person can't do this, blah, 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 blah. It's like, if they want to break the system, then they shouldn't play this game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Because and like much more helpfully, like when we were doing the thing and we just like you said, you were like, this feels off. Like, this doesn't feel quite right for your class. And I was like, yeah, this feels very powerful. Like, I wasn't trying to break the system, but it was just sort of like a moment of like, oh yeah, this doesn't feel like it should. Like, we figured this out together. So you can also come upon it a little bit more organically where you're just like, play this exactly how you would want to play this based on the mechanics I give you, and you're not trying to break something. You're just like playing it out to what the person has given you. And if that is way too powerful or way too weak or whatever, it's not fun to play, whatever it is, then that's actually the nitpicking that you can have, you know, where it's like, oh, that doesn't work. I have to figure that out.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I've had people playtest the game too, where they, you know, like I gave them that stuff and they were totally awesome about it. And it did paralyze them a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like I had one friend who I played the game with who she never used one of her abilities. Ever.
Right.
She never used her magical ability, not once, because she was intimidated by how it worked.
Yeah.
And I was like, I took from that, okay, like, that's good. I recorded on my phone. I listened back. I remembered, oh my God, she never used that ability.
Yeah.
Like, how can I make it more accessible for folks that might be intimidated by it?
Yeah, but there's another thing that we haven't really gone into, but a mechanic, and I'm using it to make a point, not just to bring up another fantastic mechanic that you have, but you have different levels of the tuning that you can do.
Yes.
Where it's like, there's the basic where you can kind of use it at will. It's a cantrip, essentially.
Passive.
Yeah, and then you have the one where you have to tune, but it's not like crazy hard to get to. It's
controlled.
It's a controlled. And then you have like the nuclear explosion of power that can happen.
Yeah.
And I remember going through it, and I was like, man, okay, I'm gonna do my nuke. I'm gonna go nuts. I'm gonna transform into this werewolf because I was sort of like a werewolf person. It's like I'm gonna go full wolf. Nothing can hurt me. I'm just like running around killing all of these like corpo people. And you're like, that's controlled. And I was like, oh shit. like I have been thinking about this game completely wrong. So there's like those moments too of just like a little bit of a miscommunication or like a false way someone's thinking about the game, which becomes like, oh, I can correct that too in that way. So
well, and the thing that I took from Blades in the Dark, right, is the idea of the whole game as a conversation, and right, like people write down when they create their character what the different levels mean for them, and that was on your character sheet.
Yeah,
like it was right there. You had written it down that way.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm reading this way, and you're like, oh, I'm reading this way, and it's like, okay, great, let's meet in the middle somewhere about that.
Right.
And that's great. Like, I think that that's actually where I want it to be.
Yeah.
I think that we as a table should be deciding like what feels good, what's cool, what's overpowered, what's too weak, things like that, and not just like the game told me that a firebolt does 1d10.
Yeah.
So that's what a firebolt does.
Because that was a really cool moment too when Ethan was playing. He played essentially like somebody whose memory was like reading the newspaper. Like
that was Summer.
That was Summer?
Yes.
Where like she could read
she could read things on people's bodies
and like kind of change them around. That you were like, that is crazy powerful.
Yes.
You're like, you just changed the entire session that I was running by taking this figure that we were kind of trying to save, but also maybe trying to stop depending on what he did next. And then Summer just sort of like flipped him from maybe a bad guy into totally good guy.
Yeah.
By kind of like removing an adjective that he had in his life story. And you were like, oh shit, that's crazy powerful.
Yeah, and then as the GM in the game, like as the designer, I've created mechanics now, which is like basically called like echo balancing. Like after each session, like you're going to talk about how echoes were used. You're going to reassess power levels. You're going to maybe rephrase some things, and you're gonna make sure that you're playing a game that everyone can enjoy.
Yeah.
You know, and some more mechanical games like D&D, they don't have that because they're they're a lot more fine tuned.
Yes.
But you know, I want to live in a world where someone uses Fireball and everyone goes like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And that person using Fireball goes, yeah, that was
real bad. Yeah, I did not expect that to happen. Yeah, I love that too. Okay, so we've kind of gone through your journey as like how you went from step to step a little bit, but I want kind of in your words, if you were someone who was at the beginning where they just sort of had this idea and they're like, oh, I kind of want to develop that. Just walk through just like a basic idea of how to get from place to place.
Write it down.
Yeah.
Write it down. I started, Nick mentioned this kind of mammoth Word document that I have that is going to be the rulebook of the game. It started with just a list. In this world, people derive abilities from their first memories.
Yeah.
In this world, corporations like abuse young children to give them stronger abilities. In this world, there are people that have a problem with that.
Yeah.
You know, in this world, people that develop neurodivergencies or in their old age, their memories become
flexible.
flexible. Their echoes become very unpredictable and dangerous, and so they are like banished from the major cities.
Yeah.
Like these are things that just came to me. I just like wrote down the ideas. Then after all of that, I was like, okay, who would I want to play in this world? Me as the player. Who would I want to be? I'm like, well, I want to be someone who can control this ability better than other people. I want to feel special.
Yeah.
And it's like, great. How do I make people feel special? You know, so it's like asking yourself questions, writing down questions that you're asking yourself.
Yeah.
Just having write it down on pen and paper, write it down in a Word document, and also the most important thing, get someone to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah.
This person does not need to be a fellow designer. Ethan has done a lot of work on this game, and we both kind of agreed. He's like consulting designer.
Yeah.
Like, because basically when I'm like, I think this is a good idea, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I go to Ethan and I'm like, okay, what do you think about this? And he's like, yes, or he's like,
Yeah.
you know, and then we talk about it.
Yeah.
We just bounce ideas off of each other.
Because also just having to defend your thesis, essentially, like,
Yes.
it like firms it up. It's like,
And that really helped actually when I showed you the game for the first time.
Yeah.
It was so satisfying because you were like, oh, what if someone wanted to do this? I'm like, I'm so glad you asked that, Nick, because here's exactly the place in the book where it says that. And you were like, that's sick. So it's nice, right? Because you can also have people, right, bring things up and then you can naturally be like, I actually have an answer for that.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, oh, I've read that section actually already and that wasn't clear. And it's like, great, thank you for telling me that.
Yeah.
I'm going to clarify that.
Yeah. I think that too later, this is like far later, one of the hardest parts about any sort of TTRPG thing is formatting and figuring out how to write the rules in a way that people are going to
Just get it down. Just get it down.
So first of all, just get it all down.
Biggest note that I got was like, this is formatted improperly. I'm like, yeah, because it's formatted stream of consciousness. No fucking kidding. Like, yes, I know. And then it ended up being a thing. It's like, I don't want to hear anything about the formatting of the fucking book.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me about it. I know.
Yeah.
But since then, I have looked at how other role-playing game books are formatted. I looked at Blades in the Dark, Monster of the Week, D&D 5th Edition, City of Mist.
Yeah.
I looked at a lot of different role-playing game books because they all format them differently.
Yeah.
And just looked at, okay, like how are they formatted? Like in what way? What matters for them? And I kind of like took a page out of each of them because it's like, it's okay. I'm not copying.
Yeah.
I'm taking inspiration from things that already exist.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the first person to write in the first person perspective didn't own it.
Yeah. And also like that is a really great point too of if you're stuck, crack open, if you're a huge D&D head, crack open the player's handbook and look at where the designers there, where they went from wherever you are. So like maybe you just finished character classes and you're like, what do I do now? You crack it open and you're like, okay, after character classes, they talk about equipment. How am I going to do equipment in this game?
Yes.
And then you start going from there as well. So you can use that as sort of like a template that you can then pour your ideas into.
Absolutely, especially if you're doing a hack. I mean, people that do hacks, they literally just like rewrite sections of the book.
Exactly.
Like Star Wars 5e just has rewritten sections of the player's handbook in it.
Right.
Like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's totally fine.
Same with Humblewood, which is another 5e kind of expansion, I guess, but it's an independent add-on. Like basically all they did there was take the feeling that they wanted to do, and then they put it in the same format as 5e and said, okay, play 5e exactly as you play it, except these are the things that these guys can do.
Yeah, Kobold Press, their monster books are based entirely off of the monster manual.
Yeah.
Right? Like they look like the monster manual. And that's on purpose because they want people to be able to interface with them.
Yeah.
It's okay. And also, I mean, this is the thing that we hear all the time as improvisers and just, you know, creatives in general.
Yeah.
Is like nothing is ever original.
Yeah.
It's okay to write about what you did that day.
Yeah.
No one cares. No one else is living your fucking life.
Yeah.
Nobody else knows what you did that day. To them, they're going to be like, how did you think of that?
Yeah.
How did you come up with that? Like for me, I was like, man, I hope Tyler doesn't think I stole his idea from that prompt that he made.
Yeah.
And then when I told him about the game, he was like, that's so sick. I'm like, yeah, it's based off of the prompt that you did in class. And he's like, oh, I never would have guessed that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, people don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care about what you do. So just do something.
Yeah. Just start. I think that is the biggest thing, like Max said. And I love the idea of start by just stream of consciousness. I love the idea of in this world, this is true.
Yeah.
And you just kind of go through there, because then that really establishes a setting. One other thing that I'll throw out there from other conversations with other designers is that if you get to a point where you're like, I'm kind of lost, try to write the core facts of your game on one page. Make a one-pager. Because if you cannot do that, you cannot explain the bare bones, stripped back all the way on one page, then you don't have a clear enough idea of what you're trying to do.
Well, and that gets back to the idea of elegance, right? And you'll hear people talk about this a lot. Shut Up and Sit Down talks about this in their board game reviews a lot, is that the idea of elegance in design.
Yeah.
And it's really what elegance is it's simplicity that makes you go, oh.
Yeah.
You know, it's like at the core of this game that I'm designing, right? You're just flipping over cards over and over.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I've thought to myself a few times in moments of weakness, like, is that enough?
Yeah.
Is that enough? And I'm like, yeah. D&D, you throw a 20-sided rock on a table and go, ooh. Like, that's exactly. The whole game.
Yeah.
The whole game is throwing a 20-sided rock on a table and going, damn. Like, that's the whole thing.
Like, yeah, essentially, like, even if, like, people be like, well, what about magic and all that? It's like, yeah, the spells and all that is someone throws the rock, and if the number hits a certain number, then the thing that you decided you wanted it to represent does the thing that it says. It's like, really, it is only rolling the dice.
Yes. It's very, very simple.
Yeah.
So it just, you know, it's all trying to find that elegance, and writing that down on one page helps you achieve that elegance. Like when the design was getting a little too heavy at one point, Ethan and I did that where we were just like, okay, what is the core of the skill test system?
Yeah.
You reveal cards. How many cards do you reveal? Honestly, sometimes we just ask ourselves, what feels like a good number?
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
5 feels like a good number.
Yep.
3 and 5 feel like good numbers, so 5.
Because 5 in a 21, a deck of 21 cards is a fifth of your deck. A fourth of your deck. So you are going through you're using your deck, which is, I think, the only thing that, like, when I first heard your idea, I was like, oh, a deck-based system. I always get nervous with those because I feel like I never use all the stuff in my deck. But because of the way you chose it, and maybe it was arbitrary, but the feeling that you had, like, you're using a lot of your cards, and so you're gonna go through your whole deck, you know.
Well, and then it was also like choosing the number of cards in the deck for archetypes, like the Swift, this runner guy, right? 8 moves, 6 of something else, 4 of something else, 2 of the last one.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And because the reason for that is 8 plus 6 plus 4 plus 2 is 20.
Yeah.
And that's a good number.
Like,
that's literally,
a good number.
that's it. That's it. And I thought about expanding it. I thought about decreasing it. And there's something about that kind of like spiral of 8, 6, 4, 2, and then 1 luck card that felt really good.
Yeah.
And then abilities that interact with the thing you can do the most. It just felt right.
Yeah.
And then in playing it felt right. And then thinking about, okay, well, how hard does skill tests need to be?
Yeah.
Well, I have a student who's a math whiz.
Yeah.
And I was talking to him about it, and he's like, oh, I could make an equation for that. And he did. He made me an algorithm that, like, I put things in, and it's like, it's so interesting. Because it's like revealing 2 of a kind of card is actually way easier than revealing 3.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like an easy skill test is 2 or 3, 2 with no abilities, 3 with abilities.
Yeah.
And then it's like 4 is medium, 5 is hard, 6 is very hard, and so on. But it's like that was all determined arbitrarily. And then once I got the algorithm, I was like, oh, thank God the math lines up.
Yeah.
Because once you've played enough games, you kind of get used to, like, this feels right.
Yeah.
We're achieving the thing, like, anecdotally the amount of times that we feel like we should be.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And also there's one thing that I'll put at the end here that you did say but kind of glossed over it at the beginning of, like, deciding beef, smarts, moves, and all that kind of stuff. There are so many different, like, ways to say those attributes.
Oh, yeah.
But if you look in any game, they're basically they're all the
same.
Yeah, they're all the same. And they all kind of cover the same genre. People understand certain things because they've seen it everywhere for 100 years.
Yes.
So like lean into that. Find some
Yes.
stuff that you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to notate this. I'm going to formulate this sort of feeling and skill thing that I want to put in my game, but I'm going to put in a wrapper that everybody knows.
Right.
And so then because people like, I picked it up and I was like, yeah, I get it. Like those 4, yeah, I understand. And then I was like, okay, so if I played this character, I have way more beef cards. Oh, okay, that means that about that character. Like there are ways that you can kind of cheat your audience too by using specific ways of like formatting or presenting information that will immediately draw their mind to other things that they've played before. So just to keep that in mind as you're starting to design as well, of like, where do you like to start when you start playing D&D as a player? Character creation kind of starts with like race, class, name, and then rolling attributes. And so like figure those out first. How's your game gonna do that? And then move on from there.
Yeah.
Mac, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this. I can't wait to play Nemosity on the podcast sometime. Maybe we can do a little review when it's done.
That was so fun.
And I am really excited to see what you come up with next. So thank you so much. And if you are interested in starting to design a TTRPG, you can come to our Discord. We have places for people to throw ideas around. You can also go to our website, tabletoppod.com, and hit us with a contact sheet question. We would love to answer it on the podcast for you. In fact, coming up, we're going to have a whole episode devoted to your questions. So please do that. And everyone, we will see you next week. All right, bye.
Bye.